The iron gate creaked as the sleek black car slowly rolled onto the orphanage grounds. A thin mist hovered in the air, while the rain fell steadily, streaming down the foggy windows. The old, faded walls of the main building seemed to tell stories of abandonment. Victor stepped out of the car, adjusting his designer coat, unable to hide his discomfort. He was a man accustomed to luxury, but standing before this worn-down building, something made him hesitate. A cold wind swept across the pavement, mingling with the murmur of children inside. As he made his way to the entrance, his footsteps echoed on the wet stone. His eyes wandered over the deteriorating facade, but his mind was elsewhere. To him, this was just another visit, another charitable gesture to keep up appearances. He entered the building, not noticing the curious stares that followed him. The staff greeted him formally, but the air was heavy, almost melancholic. The smell of mold and damp walls invaded his senses, but he remained unmoved, as if this were just a brief interruption in his luxurious routine. Across the courtyard, a dark-haired girl, no older than 8, watched him from a distance. Her large eyes sparkled with curiosity and something more, something she probably didn't even understand. She stood under the shadow of a dead tree, where the rain barely reached. Her worn dress was soaked, but she didn't seem to care. Her heart raced as she silently observed him, as if she already knew him from somewhere. Victor walked slowly through the orphanage's main hall, his expensive shoes echoing on the old wooden floor. Children played quietly while the staff kept a respectful distance. He was oblivious to it all, glancing around the room without really seeing it. To him, this place was just another stop on his busy agenda. Suddenly, a voice pierced the silence like a thunderclap. "I know you!" The childish voice, filled with an unusual certainty, made the entire hall freeze. The children stopped playing, and the staff froze in place. For a second, Victor felt his blood run cold and slowly turned toward the source of the voice. There she was, the same girl who had been watching him earlier, standing in the middle of the hall now, her eyes locked on him with an intensity he couldn't understand. Trying to regain his composure, he forced a smile and took a step forward. "You must be mistaken, little girl, I've never been here before." But the girl didn't back down. In fact, she took a step closer, her expression unwavering. "No, I know who you are. I recognize you." The discomfort Victor tried to hide began to show. He adjusted his collar, the smile fading. "You're mistaken," he repeated, his voice now more tense. The stares in the hall were making him uneasy. Everyone was waiting for his response, curious, maybe even anxious to understand what was happening. The girl didn't flinch. Her piercing eyes seemed to see right through him. "I know you," she repeated, her tone now softer, but still filled with certainty. Victor felt something shift inside him, as if a thin veil had been torn by that gaze. He didn't know how or why, but the girl's words shook him deeply. Something was wrong. The tension in the hall was palpable. Victor, his heart racing, searched for an escape, but he couldn't look away from the girl. Her voice still echoed in his mind like a persistent drumbeat that wouldn't fade. He was about to say something, anything, when the orphanage director, a tired but stern-looking woman, stepped into the scene. "Dear," the director said, trying to calm things down, "I'm sure you're confused. Mr. Victor is here to help us. He's never been here before." But the girl, her face serious and her eyes gleaming, didn't blink. "I'm not confused, I know who he is." Her voice was firm, determined, as if nothing could shake her conviction. Victor felt a chill run down his spine. Things were starting to spiral out of control. He took a step back, leaning slightly toward the door, as if planning to leave as quickly as possible. "I think this is just a misunderstanding," he said, forcing a smile. "I don't know this girl." Before he could take another step, her voice struck again, this time softer but just as sharp. "You don't remember me, but I remember you." Those words cut deep, as if they unearthed something buried far away in the recesses of his mind. Discomfort gave way to confusion. "What are you talking about?" Victor responded, his voice now less confident, almost hesitant. The director tried to step in, but the girl continued, ignoring her attempts to end the conversation. "I know who you are," she repeated, her eyes never leaving his. Victor felt something inside him begin to unravel. For a brief moment he wondered, what if it were true? But he shook his head, pushing away the absurd thought. "This is a mistake," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. He needed to get out of there, but something in those words kept him from simply walking away. The girl's words echoed in Victor's mind, as if they were tearing open doors to a past he had long locked away. He shook his head slightly, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling, but it clung to him. As he forced himself to stay composed in the orphanage, memories began to resurface, breaking through the walls he had built over the years. The rain outside, tapping against the windows, transported him back to a time when he was just a boy, with no responsibilities, but also with no control over his own life. The smell of damp wood in the orphanage reminded him of the old house where he lived with his parents and his younger brother Samuel. The sound of their parents' arguments still echoed in his head, each fight leaving an invisible scar on his young soul. He remembered how, in the midst of those conflicts, his only source of comfort was Samuel, the little boy with bright eyes who followed him everywhere, admiring him in a way no one else ever did. They were inseparable, until the day everything fell apart. The separation happened so quickly that Victor barely had time to understand it. His parents decided to divorce, and he was sent to live with an aunt in another city. Samuel stayed with their mother, and the promise of seeing each other again soon was never fulfilled. In his youth, Victor tried to keep in touch, but the letters became less frequent, and the phone calls dwindled until they stopped altogether. Time and distance tore him away from the only person he truly cared about. As his life moved forward, Victor buried that past deep within. He pursued success relentlessly, never looking back. Every achievement in the business world was a way to prove to himself that he didn't need anyone. Money replaced affection, and power replaced emotional connections. He believed he had become untouchable, invulnerable to anything that had hurt him. But now, faced with this persistent girl, something inside him began to crumble. The feeling that he recognized that look, that determination in her eyes, stirred something within him. It was like looking into a mirror of broken memories. Every word the girl spoke caused a new crack in the shield he had built around himself. "I left all of that behind," he thought with a twinge of guilt. But in that moment, something he had tried to erase for so long was rushing back with force. The past, which he had abandoned in his race for success, was now catching up to him in the most unexpected place. The director's voice seemed distant, almost muffled as she calmly explained the details. "She arrived here a few years ago," she said, her eyes fixed on the millionaire. "Her father died in an accident, a man named Samuel, with the same last name as yours." Victor's world stopped. He felt the weight of those words crash down on him like an avalanche, crushing any attempt to maintain control. His brother's name echoed in his mind, reverberating through every corner of the memory he had tried to bury. Samuel, the brother he had left behind, the brother he never looked for again. He looked at the girl once more, but this time, her eyes were no longer those of a stranger. They were the eyes of someone who shared his blood, innocence mixed with the pain of loss, the emptiness of a broken family. She wasn't just any child. She was his niece. A heavy silence filled the hall. Victor felt his heart race, but at the same time it was as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. The pain of knowing his own brother was dead hit him with a force he couldn't control. The guilt followed swiftly, an unrelenting wave of regret that dragged him under. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was look at the girl who now watched him with a mix of expectation and hurt. In her, he saw the reflection of Samuel. The same bright eyes, the same quiet determination. The memory of the boy who used to run beside him, always laughing, always believing that his older brother would take care of everything. But he had failed. Victor felt completely shattered. Years of success, wealth, and power, none of it could erase what he had abandoned. And now, faced with the truth, he realized the real cost of his ambition. He hadn't just lost a brother. He had lost the chance to protect the only family he had left. Victor could barely hear the sound of rain tapping against the windows as he hurried down the orphanage hallway. His chest felt heavy, and each step seemed harder than the last. He found an empty room, away from the chaos of the main hall, and went in. Closing the door behind him, he leaned against it, trying to steady his breathing. But the storm of emotions inside him wouldn't let up. He ran his hands over his face, as if he could wipe away with that simple gesture, the avalanche of guilt overwhelming him. For years he had convinced himself that his choice was the right one, that pursuing success and wealth was the only way to leave behind the misery and confusion of his childhood. But now, at this moment, learning that his brother was dead and that part of his family had been left to fend for themselves, he questioned whether it had truly been worth it. Victor glanced around the room, feeling suffocated by the walls. Everything he had achieved, the wealth, the prestige, the power, felt insignificant compared to the pain of loss now weighing on his heart. Every memory of Samuel flashed through his mind, like scenes from a movie he didn't want to watch. His brother's laughter, their promises to always stay together, their shared hopes. It had all fallen apart the moment Victor chose to leave him behind. He never wanted to be the brother who abandoned the others, but in his relentless pursuit of success, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. And now, the little niece he barely knew was the only link left to his past. But what could he do now, after neglecting so much? The questions echoed in his mind, each one more painful than the last, as he tried to find a way out of the guilt and sorrow that were drowning him. The next morning, as dawn broke, Victor felt a new sense of clarity. The night had been long, the hours dragging by as he wrestled with the whirlwind of emotions haunting him. Each memory, each choice in his life, seemed to scream in his mind. But now, with the soft light of the rising sun, he knew what he needed to do. Victor was no longer the man who accumulated wealth just to fill an unnamed void. The face of that girl, his niece, the restrained desperation in her voice, and the devastating revelation about his brother had ignited something new within him. It wasn't just guilt, but a flame of responsibility that he could no longer ignore. Standing in front of the orphanage, Victor took a deep breath. The simple facade of the building, with its fogged-up windows and weathered walls, seemed far less intimidating than the emotional abyss he was about to confront. But now he knew. Running away was no longer an option. As he walked into the main hall, his steps echoed in the morning silence. From a distance, he spotted the girl, sitting alone on a bench, her legs swinging in the air, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked up the moment she sensed his presence, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was something different this time. It wasn't the confusion or mistrust of the day before, but a flicker of hope. Victor walked toward her, the weight of his past choices still heavy on his shoulders, but now with the resolve to make amends for what had been broken. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew that this time, he wasn't going to walk away. From that day on, Victor began visiting the orphanage regularly, surprising not only others but himself as well. With each visit, he grew closer to the girl, who, despite her initial reluctance, started to open up to him. They spent their afternoons together, sitting in the orphanage garden, talking about small things, what she liked to do, the books she read, and even what she dreamed of becoming when she grew up. Victor watched her closely, taking in every detail of her face as she spoke. The way she furrowed her brow when concentrating, the shy smile that appeared when she talked about something she liked. It was like seeing his younger brother again, revived in her expressions and gestures. The physical resemblance was undeniable, the same deep eyes, the same unruly hair that his brother had as a child. But it wasn't just that. There was something in her personality, a wild spirit, a stubborn persistence, that reminded him of his own childhood with his brother. Those traits made every moment with her a bittersweet reminder of everything he had lost. Over time, the emotional distance between them began to fade. Victor felt a growing sense of responsibility, something he had never experienced so intensely before. It wasn't just guilt for what he had left behind, but a new kind of love and connection that he didn't know he was still capable of feeling. This daily connection forced him to face the choices he had made in his life. Each time he left the orphanage, something inside him shifted. The glittering success he had chased for so many years began to pale in comparison to the simplicity of that bond. Victor's nights became long and sleepless. As he stared out the window of his luxurious apartment, surrounded by all the comforts money could buy, he couldn't stop thinking about the orphanage and the girl who now filled his thoughts. A silent battle raged inside him. The memories of his brother, the family he had abandoned in his relentless pursuit of wealth, haunted him every minute. Internally, the pain of his past choices consumed him. He had built a life of success, but at what cost? Victor wondered if all the money and power were truly worth the absence of family ties, the loneliness that now became more apparent with the girl's presence in his life. The guilt suffocated him. Externally, the pressures of the world he lived in weighed even heavier. His professional and social circles would never understand such a drastic change. Abandon his businesses, or slow down to care for a child. It was unthinkable for those around him. He knew he would be judged, even ridiculed. There was so much at stake. His reputation, the empire he had built with such sacrifice. Victor stood at the crossroads of a devastating dilemma. He could continue living his luxurious life focused on his companies, surrounded by people who applauded him for his achievements, or he could take a step in the opposite direction, down an uncertain and challenging path, but one that, for the first time, offered something real, the chance to do what was right. Victor, finally at peace with his decision, returns to the orphanage, but this time with a different determination in his eyes. The sound of children's laughter echoes through the halls, but he can only focus on the girl who had unexpectedly changed his life. With steady steps, he walks up to the director, who greets him with a look of anticipation. "I've made my decision. I want to adopt her," Victor says, his deep voice soft, almost as if he's talking to himself. The director looks at him for a moment, measuring the weight of his words. She knew that this choice wasn't just about the girl. It was about him rediscovering a sense of purpose in his life. The tension in the air was palpable, but soon her expression softened into a smile of approval. "This is a rare thing, Mr. Victor. It's not common to see someone in your position making such a profound decision, but I believe this is the right choice, both for her and for you." Victor feels a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in years, he was doing something that wasn't about numbers, profits, or million-dollar contracts. He was choosing love, something he himself had never fully experienced. The girl, his niece, would have the chance to grow up surrounded by the care and security that his brother would have wanted for her. Right there, in front of the director, he commits to building a new life. For both of them. During the adoption process, Victor is forced to navigate a mountain of bureaucracy, something he would normally resolve with a quick signature or a generous check. But this time, things are different. Every document he signs, every conversation with social workers brings up memories he had tried to bury for so long. As he reviews the papers, flashes of his own childhood come to him unexpectedly. The sad look on his younger brother's face when he decided to leave him behind. The broken promises, the unsent letters. He feels the weight of those decisions, but instead of running away, he faces them. For the first time, Victor realizes that he's not just rescuing his niece, he's rescuing himself. Every bureaucratic hurdle becomes a step toward healing. As he signs the final papers, there's a moment where he pauses and takes a deep breath. Sitting in his office, far from the luxuries and opulence, he becomes aware of what's happening within him. The pain of his past, though still present, no longer defines him. The adoption process, which could have seemed like just another task, turns into something far more meaningful. Victor understands that by giving the girl a new chance at life, he is, in a way, giving himself a new chance. A chance at redemption, at forgiving himself, and at overcoming the pain he had carried for so long. With the adoption finally complete, Victor feels as though a huge burden has been lifted from his shoulders, but at the same time, a new kind of responsibility emerges. He is no longer just a businessman. Now, he is the guardian and mentor of a young and fragile life. He starts reorganizing his routine, something that, for a man used to a schedule dominated by meetings and corporate decisions, is no easy task. The appointments start to dwindle, meetings are canceled or postponed, contracts delegated to others. The focus is now on her. For the first time, Victor finds joy in the little things, helping with homework, taking her to parks and sharing meals at home, things that once seemed unimportant. These simple yet significant moments begin to reshape his worldview. He realizes that, despite everything he had achieved over the years, the cars, the mansions, the professional respect, none of it compares to the feeling of seeing his niece smile or feeling safe with him. The luxury begins to lose its shine, and the emptiness he had tried to fill with wealth slowly dissolves as he immerses himself in this new family life. For the first time, Victor starts to understand what is truly valuable: human connections, love, and the sense of belonging that can't be bought or negotiated. The soft wind rustles the trees around the house as the sun sets, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Victor and his niece sit on the porch watching the horizon. The silence between them is comfortable, a kind of peace he never knew he needed. He looks at her, still small but full of life, with eyes that he now recognizes as so familiar, the same eyes as his brother's. For so long, Victor had sought redemption in all the wrong places, in stuffed bank accounts, million-dollar deals, and material achievements. Now he knew that true redemption was sitting right beside him, laughing carefree as a butterfly landed on her hand. The journey to this point hadn't been easy, and he acknowledges that there's still much to be done. But the weight of the guilt he had carried for years feels lighter, dissolving in the warmth of the love that had blossomed between him and his niece. The sense of abandonment he had felt in his youth was replaced by a silent promise. He would never again let anyone in his family feel what he had felt. "Are you happy?" he asks softly. Almost afraid of the answer, she looks at him beaming. "Very," she replies with a simplicity that makes his heart race. And in that moment, Victor understands something money could never teach him: the power of forgiveness, and both his own and from those he had hurt. The journey of redemption had only just begun, but now he knew he wasn't walking it alone. Did you like the story? Comment below what you thought of the story, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.